Alif. The first Semitic letter, Alif, produces the English A sound, as in the glottal stop A sound in the word Alif, or the A sound in the English alpha. Notice that when saying those words, you contract the vocal cords. Again, notice when saying uh-oh, for example, it will produce that same glottal stop. The Alif, however, contains the A sound and also the sound, similar to the A in the English word car or mad, as opposed to apple in the other form. And natives knew which Alif sound to pronounce accordingly. Now, when non-natives started learning Arabic, an easy way to teach was to break the Alif down into different symbols. Each symbol holds a quality or characteristic of the Alif depending on the condition it's being used in when pronouncing. That is why you see different symbols to pronounce Alif sounds, such as the Hamza, which in itself is not a letter but represents the glottal stop found in Alif. This is always the Alif form you find at the beginning of words, but is not only found there, it can be found at any part of a word. And depending on where it is put on a letter and what vowel marks are attached to it, it can symbolize the sounds of a short a, u, or e. Again, today's Hamza and Alif in the long vowel form make up the ancient letter Alif. A side note, you will see an Alif not in the beginning of a word and not preceded by a fatha in order to make a long vowel in the word. This type of Alif is not pronounced, but is still a part of meaning. They call this Alif the separating Alif, since it indicates the end of a word when seen after the letter Waw. You might also come by Hamzatul Wasl, or the linking Hamza in English. It is a symbol that looks like an Alif, with a small Sad on the top of it. It represents two functions, and is created for ease of recitation. It is there since Arabic words do not start in a vowelless, or in Arabic sukoon, state. So, when starting a word that is vowelless, the Hamzatul Wasl is in place of a Hamza, and when found in between words, it is used for linking them together, by being skipped and not being pronounced. But is there so that if you run out of breath, you can start on it without skipping it, turning it into a Hamza again. In the consonant-only Quran, the word Allah, for example, uses an Alif. But of course, there are no vowels, or short vowels to be specific, written down in the original Quranic text, and you as an Arab speaker at the time are supposed to know how to pronounce it yourself using the correct vowels. In most modern Qur'ans, you will find the Hamzatul Wasl, or linking Hamza, instead of the original Alif. And knowing the rules of the Hamzatul Wasl means that you will know what vowel signs to use to pronounce the Hamza and why. You can get a set of rules to go by that are shallow and can be applied effectively for recitation purposes. Or use a Quran that already has the vowel signs in place for you. In order to know why a vowel sign is used, a deeper level of comprehension is required. It's not much though, just basic Arabic grammar. Example of Hamzatul Wasl used in the word Allah. Finally, you might also come by an Alif Maqsura, a limited or restricted Alif, at the end of certain words. It has the shape of a Ya without the dots, and which functions and sounds like an Alif at the end of a word, but is not a real letter. However, if you wanted to find the root of a word and have an Alif Maqsura, the original letter is a Ya. It only sounds like an Alif in pronunciation. That's why it's called a limited or restricted Alif, and has the body of a Ya. The reason for the Alif Maqsura is because the Ya, having no dots at the time, had different ways of being pronounced, and when dotting was being added to the Quranic text, the scribes wanted a way to differentiate the different sounds. The Alif comes from two exit points, depending on which sound or condition of the Alif we are using. The Alif, in all shades of expression, comes from the deepest initial places in the body. If we use the glottal stop sound of the Alif, the exit point will come from the deepest part of the throat, squeezing the vocal cords. Example of the Alif in Hamza condition: both the Alif found in the beginning and the Alif at the end in the Arabic word for read, Iqra, are Hamzas. The Alif comes from al-Jawf in Arabic, which is the interior chest to mouth cavity in English, when operating as a long vowel, giving you the sound similar to the English A in car, which is sounded twice as long minimum to the other forms Alif comes in, the length of which is dependent on your pace of speaking or reciting. This Alif is called Alif Mad in Arabic, or to stretch or lengthen the sound in English, and is never the Alif found at the beginning of a word. Example of Alif in vowel condition or Mad condition: قال. The Hamza form of the Alif has the attached or permanent attribute of what is called in Arabic al-Jahr, literally meaning to be apparent in English, and which technically means the complete blocking or trapping of the breath or air, so that when pronouncing a letter with this attribute, you do not run your breath on it. This is because the letter has a strong point of origin and uses it in combination with the other attributes as energy source, which is why it is considered a strong letter, sometimes called a voiced letter, thus being apparent. This attribute is the opposite of what is called al-hams, literally meaning concealment in Arabic, which technically means to fully run the breath or air when pronouncing a letter. This is because of weakness in the letter's point of origin, since it cannot rely on its exit point for energy, which is why such a letter is considered a weak letter. The attribute of al-hams, also called whispering in English, has this name because you're able to hear the effect the air has on the letter sound, just like words when whispered. The amount of breath varies depending on the letter's other attributes. There are 10 letters that have this attribute. They are the ta, tha, ha, kha, sin, sheen, sad, fa, kaf, and ha. On any letter other than those 10, you do not fully run the breath and instead block it. A way to test if you are giving the right attribute to a letter when it comes to breath is to put your hand in front of your mouth and say the letter sound. If you feel a blast or a strong current of air on your palms, then you are giving the attribute of al-hams, whispering. If you don't, then you are giving the letter the attribute of al-jahr, or apparent in English. We looked at the attributes that relate to the running or trapping of the breath or air when saying the letter. Now let's look at the same idea but for the sound. When pronouncing the Hamza, right after you touch its exit, you must fully block or trap the running of the sound of the letter, cutting the sound off at the place of exit. This attribute or quality is called Shidda in Arabic and means strength or force, as well as meaning strict or stern, and is technically explosive as in hard and fast in pronunciation. This attribute is a permanent quality of Hamza. The quality or attribute opposite this is called ar-rikhawa, meaning weakness or looseness, where you fully run the sound of the letter you are pronouncing, leaving no gap between the letter and the next, and the letter sound is heard until the beginning of the sound of the next letter in a word. In between those two attributes sits the attribute of at-tawassut, or moderation in English. There are 5 letters having this attribute: the lam, noon, ayn, mim, and ra. When Hamza is pronounced, if you try to continue to run the sound, you will be unable to. You will have to turn it into more than one Hamza in order to pronounce it. And if you just hold the sound instead of cutting it off after its exit, the Hamza will not exist. So there is a gap in sound between a letter with the attribute of a Shidda and the next letter in a word. The gap length in sound made by the attribute of a Shidda is not the same for all letters. Some letters make a larger gap than others. This is due to the other attributes also having an effect on the sound. There are 8 letters that carry this attribute: the Alif, the Ba, the Ta, Jim, Dal, Ta, Kaf, and Qaf. The Alif naturally has the attribute of being a light letter, in Arabic called a letter of tarqiq, meaning that you physically make your tongue thinner, like a bird's tongue when pronouncing it. The Alif, however, also has the attribute of what is called Tafkheem in Arabic in certain conditions, meaning that in certain cases the Alif is a heavy or full-mouthed letter, the opposite of at-tarqiq, where you make your tongue thinner. In this case, when you pronounce it as a heavy letter, you physically make your tongue thicker. So, when is the Alif thin, light, and when is it thick, heavy? The Alif is light at all times except when it comes after a letter which has the attributes of being permanently heavy and pronounced by lifting the back of the tongue. These 2 attributes are called at-tafkheem, or making heavy or thick, and al-ista'la, which means elevating or elevation. The Alif is also heavy if it comes after the letter lam or ra when they are in their tafkheem or heavy condition. The letters that are always pronounced heavy are kha, sad, tad, ta, dha, ghain, and qaf. And the letters that are pronounced heavy only in certain conditions are alif, ra, and lam. The alif is a letter that has the attribute of al-istifal, literally meaning lowering or dropping. This is because when you pronounce the alif, you must lower the back of your tongue, which is the opposite of al-ista'la, elevating the tongue. Letters, which are kha, sad, tad, ta, dha, ghain, and qaf. Besides these 7 letters, the remaining Arabic letters all have the attribute of al-istifal, or being lowered. The alif carries the attribute of al-Infitaah, which means opening, meaning that there is an opening between the tongue and the upper palate, except if it is touching the letter's exit point. The opposite of this attribute is that of al-Itbaaq, or closure in English, literally meaning adhesion, where when a letter is pronounced, the tongue touching the roof of the mouth will create an enclosure between parts or even most of the tongue and the upper palate of the mouth. Only 4 letters carry the attribute of al-Itbaaq, or closure in English: the sad, tad, ta, and dha. Finally, the Arabic letters are divided into 2 groups evenly: the sun letters and the moon letters. Phonetically, the sun letters are those that use the flexible part of the tongue when being pronounced, and the moon letters are those that do not. The names sun and moon letters have to do with how the definite article al is pronounced in combination with the letter coming right after it. It is acceptable to skip the lam or L sound in the definite article al if a sun letter comes right after it, as in the word ash-shams, the sun, where al-shams becomes ash-shams, and you instead double the letter sound that follows the lam. But for letters that do not use the flexible part of the tongue, the lam in al can never be skipped, as in the word al-qamar, the moon. This rule has to do with making speech as fluid and easy as possible. The alif is a moon letter. Unique qualities and meaning. The unique qualities and attributes of a letter gives us a sense of its meaning when it comes to sound, especially focusing on the attributes that are necessary for its existence. Making meaning out of letter sounds and the conclusions that I make are only an example of how to do so yourself. This is not the final say on this topic. I do not think that they are the only conclusions or even that they are the right ones necessarily, and I will update this information as I learn more. I will also add that not knowing this information will not be any hindrance to your reading and understanding of the Quran. Also, I would suggest taking the clear and obvious letter sound meanings, such as for the Alif and Sheen, and study the less obvious ones further. Alif is the initial letter in the Arabic, as well as in the body, originating from the bottom of the throat as well as the chest cavity. Alif is the first strong letter, as it has both the attributes of al-Jahr, or apparent, as well as having the attribute of Shidda, strength or force. It is also the first letter to have both tarqiq, or lightness, which it is most of the time, and also Tafkheem, or heaviness, when it is in certain conditions. The Alif is also the first of the moon letters. Meaning: having to do with being initial or first from within, first from source or origin, as well as final, last if considered from the outside in, and strength. For example, the first most, or the strongest most weakest, put another way, the weakest. In summary, Alif's exit point is from al-Jawf, or the cavity from the chest to mouth, and the bottom of the halq, the throat. Alif's attributes are al-Jahr, or apparent, al-Shidda, or strength or force, al-Tarqiq, or lightness or thinness, and sometimes al-Tafkheem, heaviness or thickening. Al-Istifal, or lowering, al-Infitaah, or opening, and is a moon letter. Meaning of Alif when it comes to sound: having to do with being initial or final, and strength.